An old woman stood quietly outside the glass doors of the local branch of Capital Bank. Her clothes were faded, soft beige chalwa camise, with a light scarf wrapped tightly around her head to block the dust. Her sandals were worn, and the curve of her back hinted at both age and the weight of life. She was there to cash a small check, a monthly allowance her daughter, who worked in law enforcement, sent her regularly. But as soon as she stepped in, the chatter at the counter died. Still, her eyes sparkled with calm confidence, as if she'd seen storms far worse than this sun. She reached for the door handle, opened it slowly, and stepped inside. The cold air of the bank lobby brushed her skin. She smiled faintly. The security guard by the door narrowed his eyes at her. One of the receptionists leaned in to whisper something, and then both laughed quietly. Holding her handbag close, she shuffled toward the help desk. "Before we continue, please do subscribe to my channel." "Excuse me, Beta," she said softly to the young man behind the desk. "I want to cash this check. Can you help me?" He looked her up and down like she had just asked for charity. "We don't process donations here," said with a smirk. The old woman blinked. No, it's not a donation. My daughter sends it from her account." "She works, madam," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "This space is for customers only. We can't assist people." From the street, others began to glance over. The guard now stood a few feet away, arms crossed. His eyes bored into her like she was a thief trying to pull a trick. "I have an account here." She tried again, her voice still calm. "If you could just look at your condition," the man snapped. "You expect us to believe you have an account here? You don't even look like you own a phone?" The insult hit her like a slap, but she stood still. She didn't beg. She simply held out the envelope with the check again. Silently, within minutes, the manager came down from the stairs after hearing the commotion. A man in his mid-40s, dressed sharply, his tie pinned straight, face tight with self-importance. "What's going on here?" he barked. "She's causing trouble, sir," the receptionist chimed in, claiming to be a customer. "No ID. Looks like a beggar." The manager looked at the woman, didn't ask her name, didn't check the check, didn't even glance at her hands, where the envelope still rested. He scoffed and walked closer. "Amma," he said mockingly, "you can't walk in here expecting money for free. Go outside, this isn't a shelter." She gently opened the envelope and held out her ID. He slapped it away. Gasps echoed. Her ID fluttered to the ground. A young intern near the photocopier turned to look, visibly uncomfortable. The old woman knelt slowly, painfully, to pick it up. A hush fell across the room. She stood up, still no anger, still no shouting, just silent dignity. She looked at the manager one last time, her voice quiet. "You've made a mistake today, Beta. It's not because you hit me, but because you chose to judge." He smirked. "Please leave before I call the police." She smiled. "That won't be necessary." She turned slowly and walked toward the exit. The receptionist whispered, "Poor woman probably lost her mind." The guard chuckled. These types always act like there's someone important." But as the doors closed behind her, the sunlight caught the side of her face. And if anyone had truly been paying attention, they would have noticed a slight, knowing smile. She wasn't just someone important. She was the mother of someone very important. And tomorrow, they'd all find out just how important she really is. Officer Amna Qureshi was just finishing her shift at the central precinct when her phone buzzed. The name flashing on the screen, Amy. She picked it up immediately, smiling. "Assalamu, Amy. Did you get the check?" There was a pause. Then a soft, tired voice replied, "Yes, Beta. But I think I'll go to a different bank next." Amna sat upright. "Why? What happened?" "Oh, nothing serious. The staff was just not very respectful." Her mother said it lightly, but Amna could hear the weight in her voice. Years of training in law enforcement had sharpened her instinct, and she knew immediately something had gone wrong. "What exactly did they say?" Amna asked gently, her voice tightening. Her mother hesitated. "They said I looked like a beggar. Through my ID. They told me to leave." Amna's fingers clenched around the phone. "I'm fine, Beta. Truly. Don't make a fuss." But it was too late. Amna had already stood, grabbed her uniform cap, and motioned to her junior officer. "Get the car. We're making a stop before we head home." The next morning, everything looked the same at Capital Bank. The receptionist filed her nails behind the counter. The manager sat in his glass cabin, scrolling through his messages. The guard greeted a few regular customers with a lazy nod. No one gave a second thought to the old woman from yesterday. She had become a half-joke among them, a brief annoyance. Quickly forgotten, but then the silence broke. Black SUVs pulled up to the curb. 2 uniformed officers stepped out from each one. Receptionist froze, and out of the last vehicle stepped Inspector Amna Qureshi, dressed in full uniform, a look of calm fury etched across her face. She walked through the glass doors, every step sharp and deliberate. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here regarding an incident that occurred yesterday." The room was dead quiet. The manager hurried out of his cabin, flustered. "Yes, Inspector. How can we help you?" Amna's eyes scanned the room. Her gaze landed on the receptionist. "You're the one who insulted a woman who came to cash a check?" The girl stuttered. I didn't know who she was. That's exactly the problem," Amna interrupted. "You assumed she was less than you because of her clothes, because she looked poor because she was old." "Ah!" The guard stepped forward awkwardly. "Ma'am, we thought she was a beggar. We didn't mean anything by it." "You slapped away her ID," Amna said coldly. "You laughed at her. You humiliated her in front of others." Then she stepped closer. "That woman is my mother." Isps rang out. The manager went pale. "She didn't complain because she has more grace than any of you, but I am not her. And I do not let disrespect go unanswered. I've reviewed your CCTV footage. I've got statements from others who were present," Amna continued, her voice now echoing off the high marble walls. "This wasn't just rudeness. It was class discrimination, profiling, and you did it to a woman who raised 3 children alone after our father died in service." The receptionist began to cry. The manager fumbled with his tie, sweat gathering at his temples. "You will issue a formal apology in writing to my mother today. You will also undergo mandatory sensitivity training. And if I ever hear of something like this again in any branch of this bank," her eyes narrowed, "you won't just be writing apologies, you'll be writing resumes." The bank staff nodded, stunned, silent. "And one more thing," she added, turning to leave. "Don't treat people with respect because they might be someone's mother. Treat them with respect because they're someone." And with that, she walked out back into the sunlight where her mother waited in the car. The old woman looked up, eyes crinkling. Amna smiled. "Let's go, Amy." By noon that day, a formal apology was emailed to Amna's mother. It was carefully worded, professionally formatted, but lacked sincerity. They called it a misunderstanding, claimed it was unintentional. No real remorse, no soul datum. Read it and sighed. "Amy, do you want to respond?" Her mother simply shook her head. "Let it go, Beta. You did more than enough." But Amna had a different idea. She posted the apology letter online, with a message of her own. "This is how a national bank treated my mother, a widow of a fallen officer. Not because she was rude or aggressive, but because she looked poor. This happens to thousands of women every day. Enough is enough." And then she added a hashtag. Hashtag respect without uniform by midnight. It had gone viral. Stories flooded in. An elderly woman from Quetta was denied service because she wore a dupatta too loosely. A single mother in Lahore, whose loan application was tossed in the trash until she returned with her brother. A known politician, a disabled man in Karachi, who sat at a reception desk for an hour while employees pretended he was invisible. Everyone had a story. Everyone had once been her mother. The hashtag spread, not just in Pakistan, but across the world. It was no longer just about one woman. It was about all the people silenced by snobbery and status games, and the bank. They tried to delete their social media pages, but screenshots had already done their damage. Their name was everywhere, and not in a good way. Inside the head office of Capital Bank, chaos brewed. The regional director paced the marble floors. "How did we let this happen?" he barked. "Sir, we didn't know who she was," said one senior executive. "That's exactly the point," he snapped. "You should treat everyone as if they matter, because they do." A PR team was summoned. Lawyers were consulted. Control plans were drafted, but the fire had already caught. Government officials were now tweeting support for Inspector Amna. Celebrities had shared the post. News channels requested interviews. They were no longer just trying to save face. They were trying to survive. 3 days later, the bank held a national press conference. Their CEO, a gray-suited man with tired eyes, stood before a sea of cameras. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred at our Liberty Market branch. We are instituting new nationwide training for all our staff. Discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated. A journalist raised her hand. Is this because she was a police officer's mother? The CEO paused. No, it's because she's a human being. And that should have been enough. Inspector Amna watched the broadcast from home, arms folded. She didn't smile, she didn't clap, she just whispered finally. But the real change wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the hearts of people watching. A new rule was echoing across streets, shops, offices. Treat everyone with dignity, not just the powerful, but the quiet ones, the old ones, the tired ones, because you never know whose story you're stepping on. For days, social media buzzed with Inspector Amna's story. But something deeper began to stir in the hearts of people, not just admiration for the daughter, but love for the mother. Someone dug up an old black and white photo of Amna's. Parents in uniform, her father in his army fatigues, her mother in her police uniform, younger, radiant, proud. It went viral. It went viral. Journalists started requesting interviews with Amna's mother, but she politely declined every single one. I didn't do anything heroic, she'd say gently. Amna did. But the truth was, the nation began to fall in love with her grace. Her quiet strength, her dignity in the face of disrespect. She became a symbol of all the mothers who sacrificed in silence, who faced injustice without cameras watching. One journalist wrote in Dawn, behind every decorated officer is a woman who raised her, who stood in line with calloused hands and hope in her heart. That is the real heroism. One evening, just as the sun melted behind Lahore's skyline, Inspector Amna's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Inspector Amna, this is Prime Minister Faraz. She stood up straight instinctively. Yes, sir. I want to thank you. What you did? It wasn't just brave. It was necessary. You reminded this nation how we treat the weak says more about us than how we honor the strong. She was silent for a second, then quietly replied, Thank you, sir. But I didn't do it for credit. I did it for my mother. It makes it even more powerful, he said. Before ending the call, he added, Would your mother be willing to accept a civilian honor from the state? Amna looked at her mother, who was knitting by the window. Unaware of the conversation. I'll ask her, she said, but she already knew the answer. Later that night, Amna brought it up. Double quotes. Amna, the Prime Minister wants to award you civilian honor, national recognition. Her mother looked up and smiled softly. And what will that do, Beta? It'll remind people of your sacrifice. She shook her head. I don't need medals. I already have what matters. She reached out and touched Amna's cheek gently. I have a daughter who stood up when I couldn't. Amna swallowed hard. But you deserve it, Ammi. I don't want anyone clapping for me now. Let them clap for the next poor mother who walks into a bank and gets treated with respect. Her words carried more power than 100 speeches. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted a better world, quietly, humbly, without ever giving another interview. Without accepting a single award, Amna's mother changed the country. Banks began reviewing their customer service policies. Government offices started training their staff on respectful conduct, regardless of social class. Schools used the incident as a case study on courage, humility, and justice. And Amna, she returned to work, but with a new purpose. She wasn't just an inspector anymore. She was a daughter who had seen firsthand what real dignity looked like, not in uniforms or ranks, but in silence, in patience. In refusal to kneel to shame, she carried her mother's lessons into every case, every investigation, every interaction. And so, the woman who was once told to step aside in a bank line had quietly moved a nation forward, not with protests, not with press conferences, but with grace that refused to bow. Continue. Shall I proceed to part 5? The bank manager's twist, a man hiding a secret past. The incident at the bank had gone viral. The manager's face was everywhere. Screenshots, TikToks, hashtags like hashtag shame on the bank, hashtag respect elders, and hashtag janitor mom trended for days. Within 48 hours, the man was suspended. Within a week, quietly, with no press release or explanation, he was transferred to a remote branch near a rural town far from Lahore. The public celebrated. Justice was served, or so it seemed. But deep inside the quiet corner of that new branch, a storm brewed in the man's chest, not one of anger, but of shame. He stared at the mirror in the small rented room above the branch and barely recognized himself, not because of the backlash, but because of what the woman had reminded him of. someone he tried to forget for decades. His name was Fair OOQ, and 30 years ago he had a mother just like Amna's kind, worn. Full of quiet pride, she had once walked him to school in a faded sari with stitching undone. The other boys laughed at her cracked sandals. He used to hate it. He hated the way people looked at her. He hated being poor. He hated being embarrassed. So, when he grew up, he built walls, thick ones, around his name, around his identity, around anything that reminded him of that little boy with holes in his shoes. He took a job in banking, rose fast, and swore never to be powerless again. But that day, when Amna's mother walked in, holding her ID card with shaking hands, it was like time reversed. He didn't see a customer. He saw his own mother, and he hated how much he had changed. One night, Farouk sat at his desk in the empty branch and began writing. To Madam Inspector Amna, you don't know me, not really. I was the man behind the counter. The man who disrespected your mother. I am writing not for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I am writing because I want to tell you a truth that even I didn't know that day. When your mother looked at me with sadness in her eyes, I didn't just feel shame. I felt recognition because my mother once stood where she stood, with nothing but dignity and broken shoes. And I hated that life so much that I lost myself trying to escape it. I became the man who would have humiliated her. I am sorry not just to you, but to the memory of the woman who raised me. Please know. Your mother restored something in me I thought was long dead. Thank you. He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and never sent it. He didn't need to. Some letters are written to free the soul, not reach a mailbox. Weeks passed. Farouk began greeting every elderly customer at the branch personally. He offered chairs, water, even tea. He trained his staff to do the same. He printed a quote and hung it near the counter. How we treat the least among us is who we truly are. No name. But those who had seen the viral video would recognize the deep origin. He even began volunteering at a local community center for seniors quietly, without selfies, without social media posts. One evening, as he walked home under the old, orange streetlights, he paused by a small tea stall. An old woman smiled at him and asked, "Beta, do you work in that bank?" "Yes, Auntie. You were the one who gave me a chair when my legs hurt." He smiled. That wasn't me. That was a lesson I learned from someone braver. She didn't understand, but he did, because sometimes redemption isn't loud. It's not viral. It's not televised. It's a chair offered. A voice lowered. A memory honored. Every morning, Inspector Amna tied her hair into a tight bun, clipped on her badge, and smiled into the mirror. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a shield. No one saw the long nights she sat beside her mother's bed, massaging her feet swollen from years of labor. No one saw the way her hands trembled after every confrontation at the police station, not from fear of criminals, but from fear of letting her people down. Because being the adopted daughter of a powerful politician meant her victories were questioned, they said. She got this job because of him, they whispered. She's just a face, not a fighter. They didn't know that she used to study under streetlights when the power went out. They didn't know that before she was adopted. She lived in an orphanage, and that every day since, she'd fought to prove she belonged. One officer in her precinct asked Danielle, never smiled at her. He was sharp, brilliant, and cold as stone, while others respected her because of her father's name. Danielle watched her like a hawk, waiting for a misstep. One afternoon, after she successfully de-escalated a violent hostage situation, Danielle approached her. "You handled that well," he said flatly. She raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment or an evaluation? He shrugged. Both. I just hope you're not relying on headlines instead of instinct. She bristled. I've been in more real situations than you can imagine. I hope so, he said, walking away. That night, she sat alone in her office, staring at the commendation she'd received earlier. Why did his words sting more than the praise comforted? Because deep down, she feared he might be right, and that fear made her work even harder. One night, Zamna helped her mother fold laundry. The older woman paused and looked at her. Beta, you work too hard. You barely sleep. Amna smiled tiredly. I have to prove myself, Ma. People think everything I've done is because of who adopted me. Her mother touched her face gently. Then let them think. You know the truth. I know the truth. Allah knows the truth. Amna swallowed the lump in her throat. She never cried in front of her team. She rarely cried at all, but her mother's words opened something in her. I don't want to be seen as someone who was handed a badge. I want to earn it. Her mother whispered, child, you earned it the day you stood up to the world. Not for yourself, but for me. Amna didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the girl she once was, barefoot, unnoticed. Scared, she made a promise to her younger self. I'll never let you be invisible again. A week later, Amna got a call. A young girl had been rescued from a trafficking ring. She wouldn't speak to anyone. Amna drove to the shelter herself. The girl, no older than 10, sat curled in a blanket, her eyes wide with fear. Everyone else had failed to connect with her. Amna knelt beside her and whispered, I used to be small and scared too. The girl didn't respond. So Amna pulled out a tiny bracelet from her own wrist, a cheap thread her mother had tied years ago. It's promising protection. She tied it gently onto the girl's wrist. It's magic. It kept me safe. Now it's yours. Girl finally looked up, just a flicker of trust, spark, and that was enough. Because Amna knew true authority wasn't in ranks or stars. It was in presence, in kindness, in showing up when no one else would. It was the day everyone had been waiting for the mayor, journalists from every major network, even the governor's liaison. All were gathered outside Central Precinct. The press conference was scheduled to begin at noon. Amina stood behind the podium with her shoulders straight, flanked by the city commissioner and her adoptive father, Senator Karim Bashir. Despite the chaos the school case had caused, had never spoken publicly about it, till now. Behind the cameras were the children's families. The little black girl Zahra, who'd been hurt so deeply, stood beside her mother. Holding her hand, it wasn't just a press conference, it was a reckoning. Amna looked at the sea of faces and took a long breath. Then she began. We are here today not just to address a school incident, Amna began, her voice firm but calm, but to confront what our society has allowed to grow. Quietly in its corners, hate, privilege, and silent permission. The cameras clicked. This isn't about one bully or one child, she continued. This is about the systems that allow harm to go unpunished, until someone powerful enough cares. She turned slightly toward Zahra. When a child is hurt, in our city, no matter the color of her skin or how much money her parents make, it should matter, and we should act. There was a silence so thick even the wind felt hushed. Asta continued. The officer who tried to silence this case has been suspended. The school's administration is under review, but what we really need is to look at ourselves. No politicians speak, no staged emotion, just truth, and truth pierced deeper than drama ever could. When Amna stepped back from the podium, Senator Karim stepped forward, his voice cracked. I adopted Amna when she was 10 years old. Back then, she was a fighter. She still is. But what she's taught me is far greater than anything I taught her. He paused, placing a hand over his heart. She reminded me that laws are not just papers in Parliament. They are meant to protect the voiceless. And if they don't, they must change. There were murmurs in the crowd. The senator, known for his hard stance on crime and politics, had never spoken this openly or this emotionally. He wasn't defending his daughter as a favor. He was honoring her as someone who had changed him. And in that moment, people didn't just see a politician's daughter. They saw a leader. Later that night, news ran the story with headlines that read, Adopted daughter of Senator leads. Charge against school injustice, Inspector Amna breaks silence. Demands systemic change. A black girl's bruise echoes across the nation. But Amna wasn't celebrating. She sat on her rooftop, her mother beside her, sipping tea in silence. Did it work? Her mother asked gently. Amna looked at the stars. I don't know, but maybe someone somewhere will think twice now. Her phone buzzed. A message from Danielle. You didn't speak like a cop today. You spoke like a revolution. She smiled. Then came another text from Zahra's mother. She asked me if she could be like you when she grows up. Thank you. Amna finally allowed herself to breathe. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun in the open. And for the first time, the city wasn't just watching her, it was listening. A week later, Zahra sat cross-legged. On her living room floor, box of crayons beside her, she wasn't at school. Her mother had kept her home until a decision was made about the principal and the bully, instead of math and spelling. Today Zahra drew. Not flowers or cartoons, but women. Women with badges. Women with curly hair like hers. women with deep brown skin and gentle eyes. Her mother sat quietly folding laundry nearby. "You draw on superheroes again?" she smiled. Zahra didn't look up. Not superheroes. Real people. Like Miss Amna. She picked up a purple crayon. Purple means brave. Her mother blinked back tears. "Then color her whole coat purple, baby." Zahra nodded. She had been hurt, yes. But pain wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her becoming. 2 days later, Zahra's drawing arrived at the police station, folded inside a letter with careful handwriting. "Dear Miss Amna, thank you for helping me. You made me feel like I'm not small. I told Mama I want to be like you, so I can help kids when I get big. I don't like what the girl did to me, but I'm not scared anymore. Love, Zahra." Amna read it 3 times before silently placing it in her coat pocket, the pocket over her heart. That night, she shared the letter at a youth forum where she was invited to speak. She read it aloud, without changing a word. Silence followed, then thunderous applause. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it arrives in a child's crayon drawing, and a voice so soft it demands to be heard. A week later, a press release came from the bully's parents. They were withdrawing her from the school. In the letter, they admitted they had overlooked the signs and asked for forgiveness from Zahra's family in the school community. It didn't undo what had been done, but it mattered. More unexpectedly, a video surfaced. It was the bully herself, in front of her phone, tearfully saying, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I thought it was. Funny, but it wasn't. I wish I hadn't done it. I hope Zahra knows she didn't deserve it." The internet was torn. Some forgave, others said it was scripted, but Zahra. She just stared at the screen and said quietly, "I think she's really sorry." Her mother kissed the top of her head. "That's your choice, baby." Zahra looked up. "No, that's my power." The school reopened under interim leadership, and this time, things were different. There were signs in the hallways about kindness and respect. Students of all backgrounds felt a new awareness ripple through the school, and Zahra, she returned not as a victim, but as a girl whose story changed an entire system. On her first day back, she wore her favorite scarf, the one with stars, and carried a lunchbox covered in purple stickers as she walked past the lockers. Kids looked at her differently. Not with pity, with admiration. And when a boy called out, "That's the girl from TV," she just smiled and walked on. Because Zahra didn't need to be famous. She was already fearless, and that was enough. In the quiet of her office, Amna stared at the photo on her desk. It was from years ago, fresh out of the academy uniform. Too big smile, a little unsure. Back then, she thought keeping her head down was strength. Let the world mock. Let them whisper. She would outwork, outrun, outperform. But Zahra had changed something. Because Zahra never whispered. Zahra spoke. Even when her voice shook, and now other voices were following. A message came to Amna's inbox. "My name is Alina. I'm 14. Saw what happened to Zahra. It happens at my school too, but I'm scared to tell." Another followed. Then another. Messages from girls across the country. And in each one, a thread of pain and hope and a sat up straighter. It was time, within a month, Amna launched a pilot initiative with the Ministry of Education and Internal Affairs. The name. The Zahra Shield, a nationwide program placing trained liaisons, especially women of color in schools, to monitor bullying, report racial abuse, and empower victims. Workshops. Anonymous reporting, peer circles, helplines in every school. It began in Zahra's district, then expanded to 5, then 15. Within months, the Zahra Shield was being discussed in Parliament. They called it bold, ambitious, necessary. Zia, HRA, visited one of the first schools where it launched. The principal gave her a tour. Students stopped her in the hallway. Little girl hugged her and said, "You look like me." Zahra blinked. "You look like me too." They both giggled. History was shifting, not from a courtroom, but from a crayon-colored letter, and a girl brave enough to send it. It was a sunny Tuesday when a camera crew came to Zahra's house again. But this time, she wasn't hiding. She wore a purple dress and sat next to Amna on the couch. The interview was for a national morning show. The anchor leaned forward and asked, "Zahra, when you were hurt, what helped you the most?" Zahra looked at Amna, then at the camera, knowing someone believed me. The anchor turned to Amna. "And what do you want girls watching this to know?" Amna took a breath. that the world won't always hear you, but speak anyway. Your story matters, even if your voice is small, and that bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it's just ... surviving. The clip aired across the country. Millions watched and millions whispered the same word in their hearts. Finally. Inside Zahra's old school, there's now a mural near the gymnasium at first. It was just Zahra's face, mid-smile, scarf flowing like a flag. But then, more names appeared. Girls, boys, teachers, mothers, officers, anyone who spoke when it was easier to stay silent. They called it the Wall of Voices each month. New names are added. Below Zahra's portrait, in looping gold letters, reads, Zahra sometimes walks past it after school. She doesn't stop long. Just long enough to whisper, keep going. Because somewhere another child is being told they don't belong. But now there's a shield, a sisterhood, a wall, and a story that keeps being told not to dwell in pain, but to teach the world how to heal. 3 months after the Zahra Shield had expanded to 60 schools, Principal Harris received a plain white envelope in his office mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten in careful, loopy script. Dear Sir, I once told my daughter that people would not always be kind, that she would have to be strong. What I did not expect was that a school would fail her so completely. But I also didn't expect one police officer to change everything, and for my daughter to become the reason other girls now feel safe. For that, I forgive you. There was no signature. But Harris knew who it was from. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the paper back into the envelope, and for the first time in his long career, he cried. A year later, Zahra received a phone call from the Presidential Youth Committee. They were nominating her for the National Bravery Award, the youngest ever. At the ceremony, Zahra was silent as she walked up. She wore a navy blue outfit and a silver pin shaped like a book. Her speech was simple. I'm not brave. I was just tired of pretending nothing was wrong. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd stop. But they did. What changed things wasn't me. It was the people who stood next to me when I couldn't stand anymore. So if you're listening and you're scared, look for your people, and if you don't find them, become them. The room stood in thunderous applause. Her father wept in the second row. 2 years later, Officer Amna retired, not out of age, but purpose. She launched a foundation in Zahra's name, the Zahra Voice Trust, dedicated to training teachers, social workers, and police officers to better handle cases of bullying and racial harassment. At her farewell, she gave one last speech. I joined the force because I believed justice was about arrests and evidence. But it's more than that. It's believing the child who says, I'm scared. It's the mother who says, I warned her. And it's a girl who refuses to stay broken. Zahra gave her a bouquet of purple tulips. Thank you, she said. Emina smiled. No, Zahra. Thank you for being louder than the silence. In another part of the country, at another school, a new girl walked in, skin a little darker than most scarf, pinned neatly around her head. She looked nervous, alone. At lunch, 2 boys snickered. One threw a grape at her. Before the girl could flinch, someone stood up. A tall girl with glasses, her voice firm. That's not funny. She deserves respect. Others turned. Others joined in. The boy went quiet. The new girl looked up, eyes wide. The tall girl smiled. Don't worry. We don't let bullies win here. You're safe. The new girl smiled back. She didn't know who Zahra was. Not yet, but she would, because the world Zahra left behind was finally learning to be kind. 5 years after her speech at the National Bravery Awards ceremony, Zahra Khan stood before the UN Youth Council in Geneva. She was no longer the scared girl in the school hallway. She was now a law student. Halfway through her degree at Oxford, specializing in international human rights, the voice was calm, her accent soft but confident. She wore her scarf like a crown. The scars we carry are not our shame. They are our proof that we fought through. Something that we came out on the other side. And we have every right to demand a world that does better for the ones coming next. She was met with a standing ovation when she stepped down. Diplomats, some of the world's most powerful people, approached her not as a girl, but as an equal. Zahra smiled quietly. She didn't want fame. She didn't want credit. She just wanted no other girl to suffer in silence again. Kayla. Richardson was almost expelled, almost. But the Zahra Shield initiative included a restorative justice program instead of punishment. It gave students a path to redemption through therapy, empathy training, and direct accountability. Kayla, once the cruel queen bee, found herself in weekly group sessions with kids. She never cared to understand. She was angry at first, then embarrassed, then quiet. When she spoke one afternoon, her voice broke. I was horrible. I bullied Zahra because I thought it made me powerful. But it just made me afraid. Afraid someone would one day treat me the same way. Kayla changed. Not all at once, but slowly, truthfully. 2 years later, she volunteered with the Zahra Voice Trust, and when she graduated, she applied to become a teacher. Kids deserve someone who sees them, she told Amna, even the angry ones. Principal Harris didn't resign. He stayed, but not out of pride. Out of duty, he admitted his failures publicly. At a town hall meeting with parents and students, his voice cracked when he said, I ignored her because I didn't want to see myself as a coward, but that's what I was, and I am so sorry. He partnered with Officer Amna and Zahra's father to install one of the most inclusive school support systems in the country. He attended every Zahra Shield training. He listened, he learned, and one day, years later, when a teacher was accused of mocking a Muslim student, Harris didn't hesitate. He suspended the teacher, protected the student, and wrote a letter to Zahra. Thank you for holding a mirror up to my failures, still believing I could grow. Zahra was one girl, but her story lit sparks in cities she'd never even visited. In one school, a black student ran for class president and won on a campaign about kindness and visibility. In another, a group of hijabi girls started a podcast called Hear Us that discussed racism, identity, and power. In yet another, boys who once laughed at bullying started peer support clubs because they realized silence is also a kind of cruelty. Zahra didn't know all of them, but she received their letters, hundreds of them, from children who wrote, because of you, I spoke up. Because of you, I stopped apologizing for who I am. Because of you, I believed someone would listen. Zahra read every one, then placed them in a wooden box beneath her bed, the same one she once cried into, and whispered, not alone. It was a slow Sunday morning at the Lakeside Cafe in Birmingham. Zahra had taken a part-time job there during her university break. She liked the quiet hum of the espresso machine and the scent of cinnamon rolls baking behind her. Bell on the door jingled. She looked up, and her heart paused. A woman walked in, tall, blonde, her hair in a neat ponytail. Her eyes flickered with hesitation when they landed on Zad. It was Mrs. Jenkins, her old literature teacher, the one who never said anything, the one who looked away when Zahra was mocked. Zahra swallowed, but instead of turning away, she smiled. Softly, good morning, she said, voice calm. Table for one. Mrs. Jenkins nodded, speechless. She sat at the corner, ordered tea, and glanced up now and then. There was something aching behind her eyes. When Zahra brought the tray, the woman spoke at last. I don't expect you to remember me. Zahra met her gaze gently. I remember everything. Mrs. Jenkins cupped the warm mug, trembling. I read about you. Speech, the UN, the initiative, everything you. Became everything I failed to stand for. Zahra didn't flinch. Mrs. Jenkins leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. I should have said something. Should have stopped Kayla. Should have told Principal Harris he was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job, and I told myself silence was neutral. I was wrong. Zahra exhaled deeply. I spent nights crying over the silence, she said quietly. It hurt worse than the words. Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her eyes wet. I left teaching after that year. I couldn't face myself. There was a long pause. Then Zahra said softly, you could have disappeared. But you didn't. You walked in here today. Mrs. Jenkins looked. Surprised? Why does that matter? Zahra smiled. Because courage doesn't always come first. Sometimes it shows up late. But it still matters. As Mrs. Jenkins prepared to leave, she hesitated at the counter. Then, pulling out a folded paper from her coat, she slid it across. I wrote this a few years ago, she said. I never had the courage to send it, but maybe now. Zahra opened. Once the woman left, it was handwritten, a mix of apology, grief, and gratitude. One line caught her breath. Were a storm the world tried to silence. But storms don't ask for permission. They move. They change landscapes and they leave. Behind new skies, Zahra folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. She didn't cry, but for the first time in a long time, her chest felt peaceful. The circle had closed. She was not the girl in the hallway anymore. That night, Zahra sat by the lakeside near the cafe. Her scarf fluttered gently in the breeze. She watched as the horizon lit up orange, kink, gold. A sunrise. Behind her were years of pain, but ahead of her, possibility. From bullied girl to beacon of light. From whispers to world stages. From brokenness to healing. Not because life was easy, but because she chose not to let cruelty write the ending. She whispered into the wind to every girl sitting. Alone in a school bathroom, every boy scared to cry, every teacher unsure of their voice. You are not what they called you. You are not their silence. You are more. You are more. So much more. And the sky wide and tender seemed to agree. Years later, Zahra stood in her apartment in London, preparing for another interview. On the mirror sat a photo of her 16-year-old self, scarf crooked, eyes tired, but still standing. She used to avoid that image now. She kept it as a reminder of where she came from, of who she fought to become. In her soft voice, she rehearsed her message again, one she'd said to thousands. You are not weak for breaking. You are strong for healing. Her phone buzzed, a reminder about the BBC segment that evening. They were doing a special called From Silence to Power, the Zahra Khan story. She took one last look in the mirror and smiled. Let's tell them how the bullied girl became a lighthouse. Back in her old college town, the one Stocksit campus had changed. The administration, after immense public pressure, created a diversity and accountability board named after her, the Zahra Khan Foundation for Safe Schools. Students now had access to mental health support, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory inclusivity workshops, and the best part, a wall by the auditorium bore a quote etched in silver letters. Kindness is not weakness. Courage does not always shout. Sometimes it is found in those who dare to stay kind in cruel places. That quote was from her first TED Talk. Now, it stood as a beacon to those who once sat where she had, silent, scared. Unseen, her story traveled far. Zahra's face appeared in school assemblies across Europe, in South African townships. Her video was translated into Zulu and shown to teenage girls in the U.S. An entire school district adopted her peer ally program, where older students became guardians for those vulnerable to bullying. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a movement, and yet she never forgot the emails. The quiet inbox. 14, they call me a rat because of my accent. I'm a boy who likes poetry. They shove me into lockers. Thank you for proving that I'm not worthless. Zahra responded to as many as she could. Each one mattered. Each one reminded her. The world still had bruised hearts, looking for soft places to land. One day, she visited her childhood home, now owned by another family. She didn't knock just. Stood across the street, watching the front porch, where she once cried herself to sleep. Her mother had passed peacefully a year ago. Her father was in Karachi, remarried, but proud. And Zahra. She was at peace. As she walked away, a little girl across the road waved. She had a scarf around her tiny head, and a book in her hand. Zahra waved back, her eyes warm. The girl beamed and shouted across the street. My name's Zahra too. The woman paused, smiled, and whispered to herself. Then you're already stronger than they'll ever know. Dear you, the one hiding in the school bathroom. Zahra's voice trembled slightly as she read aloud. The letter she'd written for her new book. It was called Letters to the Unseen Ones. What? She'd written it not to sell, not to impress, but because there were still so many girls, boys, children, hiding behind pain that had no name. I see you clutching your sleeves, wishing you could disappear. I see how your smile flickers before it fades. I see you trying to be invisible, hoping no one notices, and yet praying that someone might. The letter ended. You are not invisible to me. You are someone I once was, and someone I will always fight for. It came as an email. Subject, you probably won't read this, but I'm sorry. It was from Heba, the girl who once spat cruel words. Like venom who led the chants, the lies, the laughter. Now she wrote, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did to you. I was full of anger at myself. You just became the safest target. Zahra stared at the screen for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keys, then typed, hurt people, but healing people, help others heal. She didn't know if Heba would write again. It didn't matter. She forgave her, not to erase the past, but to release herself from carrying it. Zahra created a quiet project called Whisperborn Letters, an anonymous online archive where people could send messages they were too scared to say aloud. Some were short. Mom, I wish you saw me. To my bullies, I survived. To my younger self, I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Others were longer, like poems written in pain and courage. The project grew. It reached prisons, schools, therapy centers, and one day, she got a message. I read the Whisperborn letters every night. They make me feel like I'm not alone anymore. Thank you. Zahra smiled. The girl who once sat alone at lunch was now building bridges between broken hearts across continents. The final pages of Zahra's book were written like a lullaby, not dramatic, not loud, just soft, honest truth, spoken like a bedtime story. Sleep now, brave one. The world didn't deserve your tears, but your strength made it a better place. May your pillow carry less weight tonight. May your breath flow like peace returning home. And if no one has told you this lately, you mattered. You still do. Zahra closed the book and turned off her lamp. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, her words drifted through the world softly, gently like stars whispered into the ears of those who once felt unseen.